I've noticed that there's a lot of misconceptions about the nature of psychosis, and it tends to be misconstrued. People will say things to me like, what were you thinking? Why didn't you think that through? What would make you think of doing that? And the key word here is think, because when I'm in psychosis, I can't think like everyone else, and I lose the ability to have any control over my thoughts because they're replaced with hallucinations and delusions and misconceptions of their own, which are unfounded in reality. Psychosis is literally losing your mind. So what happens when your mind breaks? There is no judgment anymore. There is no concept of logic or reason. You have no awareness of your motives or actions anymore, and you cannot make decisions with reasonable discretion. You do things you would never normally do, often out of fear or a sense of survival. You cannot have any sense of logic because you're in an illogical mindset. With that in mind, I want to share about something that came up recently because I think it was misunderstood as an action that I had control over that I actually really didn't. Now, like I said, psychosis can make you do things you would never normally do, things that are completely out of character and against your nature, and this has applied to me in many circumstances. I have done a lot of things that I would never do, and one of the things I did was I burned a book, and I shared about it in a video, and it kind of came up that I didn't take the right action when I burned that book. But the thing is, I don't actually condone burning books. Like I said, that's not something I would normally do. I have very strong opinions against burning books. So here's the thing to understand. My views are related to historical acts of anti-Semitism. And I grew up in a Jewish community, so I learned a lot about the Holocaust. And one of the things I learned that really angered me was that Nazis would burn mass amounts of books as a hate crime against Jews. They burned books pertaining to Judaism as a way of erasing Jewish culture and religion. And this had serious consequences that impacted the recorded history of Judaism that still impacts us today. This censorship was oppressive and unjust and eradicated a lot of knowledge and history that we'll never get back. So yeah, I have very strong opinions about book burning, and yet I myself burned a book. What needs to be understood is not that I committed the act of burning a book. It's that under the influence of psychosis, I had something much greater going on, and this was a consequence of something far more severe in the bigger picture of things. In psychosis, all bets are off. Anything and everything can happen because I lose all concept of my perception of reality. I have no control over my thoughts or my mind, and I have no cognizance of what I am saying or doing. My actions are understandably erratic and uncharacteristic of who I really am. So under that influence, it's understandable that I would do things outside of the norm. I would do things that I would regret later, that I do regret, things that are just unbelievably reckless and so out of line with my values and my morals and my beliefs. I have gotten married in a psychotic state, which is something I've talked about before. It was a terrible choice, something that I didn't really have a lot of control over. I had only known the man for 2 weeks, and it ultimately resulted in an annulment and a no contact order. So I wasn't doing my best, and I wasn't thinking clearly, if at all. So in regards to the book that I burned, I was afraid of the book, and as I said earlier, a lot of the times the actions that people in psychosis take are born out of fear or a sense of survival. And I was in that mode, and I had a belief that I was doing the right thing by burning the book. But the thing about beliefs when you're psychotic is they're actually delusions. Delusions are false beliefs unfounded in reality. So my belief that I was doing the right thing wasn't real. I hope that better explains why people with psychosis often do the reckless, irrational things that they do. It's not necessarily that we have premeditated thoughts about what's happening. We often don't understand what we're thinking, and that in itself is the nature of psychosis. If you're ever wondering how the mental health stigma is doing, I can assure you it is alive and well. I strive with my videos to normalize mental health, and I do this because I have felt a lot of shame around my own issues, and I don't want other people to feel shame for things that are actually quite normal. I think a lot of people don't know that these things are normal because there's not a lot of talk about it. So I just want to open a conversation for that. And I get so accustomed to interacting with like-minded people who can relate that I sometimes think, yeah, I don't really think I'm doing all that much because, I'm not really challenging anything. Like, this is all pretty much relatable until I get those comments, like that 5% amount of people that just don't get it and won't get it and will never understand. I think some of my favorite comments that I get are the more outlandish ones where the commenter is clearly out of touch and doesn't have any idea what they're talking about. So whatever offensive barbs they throw at me, they just don't offend me, because how can I take offense from someone who doesn't know what they're talking about? But then there are some that really bother me, and it's not necessarily because I take offense, it's because I know that people who read my comments can find this hate and it might upset their mental health. Sometimes I delete comments that I think are triggering to other people and not necessarily me, because I don't want to perpetuate the stigma. And there are a lot of stigmatized things that people say. Recently, there was one commenter who was antagonizing me across several videos, and she was trivializing psychosis. And she would do this in ways like saying, oh, well, it sounds just like a drug trip, so it must be just like that. And I would say, no, actually, it's nothing like a drug trip. And she'd say, okay, so what's the problem? The problem is that when psychosis is reduced to like a hallucinogenic trip, the severity is minimized and it can be disabling. So when people aren't taken seriously for their mental health, they are kind of cast aside. They're sometimes being gatekept or gatekept from resources by people who deem it not severe enough. A lot of times people who don't have mental illness can't understand having a mentally ill mind because it's outside of their frame of reference. And this is a phrase I use a lot, outside of a person's frame of reference, because a lot of stigma just comes from people not being able to relate and thinking, okay, so this is my experience. My experience is everyone's experience. If I have mental health that is stable, how could someone possibly not? Because I can't fathom that for myself. And because I can't see it and I can't experience it, it must not be real. People are afraid of what they don't understand, and they don't like to look at something they don't understand. And psychosis can be a very in-your-face condition that cannot be denied. That scares people. A lot of people are afraid of the people they see talking to themselves, and it's not because we pose any threat. It's just because they can't relate. It makes them uncomfortable to see something they don't understand. If anyone who sees this happens to be not mentally ill, happens to be mentally stable, someone who has never experienced mental illness in any fashion, I would challenge you to just not take your mental health for granted. Like, understand what a privilege you have. You literally have a privilege. And understand that what you maybe don't think about every day is something that a person spends every minute of their day struggling with. And appreciate that there are people who are literally hospitalized for life who wish they could just have one day with your mind. One of the beliefs I had in psychosis that I just couldn't shake was the belief that I was dead, I was in the afterlife, and the afterlife was just like normal everyday living life, except that everyone was in on it but me. We were all dead and no one would tell me. Who remembers the movie Wrist Cutters, A Love Story? That movie was so amazing. I love that movie. It's kind of old now. It's from 2006 and it was an indie film about basically an afterlife made up of people who had all killed themselves. And there was a guy who he lived in this really dull purgatory. He had a boring job, he had a lame apartment, his life was really dull. In every single way, it was just like his life before, only way more boring. It's an excellent movie, well worth checking out. I highly recommend it. It's just adorable. It's got a little bit of magic realism to it, so if you enjoy that kind of stuff, it's called Wrist Cutters: A Love Story. Anyway, this belief was not created by that movie. I just think that movie is the most accurate depiction of what that belief was like for me. I think the belief came from the fact that I had survived an unaliving attempt when I was 17. And from that attempt, I did actually like completely black out and wake up in the hospital. And so the belief that after blacking out, I woke up in the afterlife just kind of followed me. It didn't help that I had met other people who also shared this belief after failed unaliving attempts. So there was kind of like a shared consciousness about the credibility of reality. Anyway, someone just kind of asked if I would elaborate on that, and it was a long time since that comment was made that I decided to make this video, so I hope they see it. I'm sorry if they don't, but if you're out there, I'm making this response for you. I hope you like it. Anyway, that's just one of those like unshakable beliefs that carried past psychosis. Can you explain how or what psychosis looks like for you? Yes, I'd be happy to. From an inward perspective, from what I'm experiencing and perceiving, psychosis looks like just pure chaos, and every single moment is heightened, and it feels like the climax of a film, except there's no resolution. So, you know, with the narrative structure, how the peak is up here and then comes back down, it just is here and here and here, and things will just never end. And I'll think to myself, oh God, it's almost over. Whatever it is I'm going through is going to be resolved. And then there will be a new thing, like a new delusion that is just as heightened and just as bad. It is also so incredibly terrifying, and I know this is not true of everyone who experiences psychosis, and some people actually have a good time, but for me and a lot of other people, it is scarier than anything you could experience in normal reality. I experienced things that could not possibly happen that, you know, if they did happen, would just scar me for the rest of my life. And because it's real to me, it does scar me for the rest of my life. And certain delusions I have are the things you would really only see in like a really graphic horror film, things like The Human and a Serbian film, just really just the worst things you could imagine. From an outward perspective, I have been told by multiple people that it is actually very scary for them too. It is very scary for them to see what I'm like in that state, and you know, the progression of it can be fast or slow, and at the start it will seem like I'm all of a sudden very spiritual and I'm suspicious of everything, and I'll be asking people like, did you hear that? Do you know what's going on? Like, what's up with that? And they'll be like, oh, no, you're just paranoid. And I'll become very manic, and I'll talk really fast, usually about like spiritual stuff that I think is happening. And once it gets to the point where it's like a break, you know, I am in full fear mode. So what people are seeing is me running away from things that aren't real. Just they'll be like, where are you running to? What are you running from? And there will be seemingly nothing provoking it to them. And the faces I make, like if you see a person who is absolutely agonized by their fear, it's scary to see someone that terrified, to see how scared a person actually can become. And a lot of times the things I say that are so irrational, saying like, no, I know you killed my brother, that can be scary because what I'm saying is often, you know, terrifying context. I don't know, it's just scary for everyone involved. Also, what I think is probably the scariest thing for my friends and family to witness is me just become a completely different person, and all of who I am just completely disappears and is taken over by this really outlandishly like scared, paranoid, erratic, sometimes volatile person. And yeah, where'd she go? Like, where'd my daughter go? She's gone. So I hope that answers your question. That's kind of, at least from my perspective and other people's perspective, what it's been like and what it looks like when I go into psychosis. A lot of people think that those of us who experience psychosis can't remember our actions, and I don't know where that comes from. But aside from periods of blackouts, I do remember most of what happened in my episodes. The thing is, I just don't remember it clearly. It's as if I remember it through a filter. I can't really tell the reality of what happened because it's superimposed with hallucinations and delusions that kind of mask what was really going on. So I kind of have to sift through all of what I thought was going on to parse out what was really going on. And that might be confusing to understand because unless you've ever had to question your own reality, you might not know what exactly that looks like, but I have a great analogy for you. So let's say you're in a church. Churches famously are covered in stained glass windows, and it's just fragmented pieces of colored glass, and when you look through that glass, it distorts whatever you're looking at. So say I was looking at a tree through a stained glass window. Now I know it's a tree and I can tell by the shape of it and from my own personal reference with experience with trees that it's a tree, but I'm seeing it as red and blue and green. Now, logically, I know trees aren't red and blue and green, so I kind of have to pick out for myself what is real about this tree and throw away what I know is not true about trees. So this might look like determining, okay, the tree has brown bark because I know that all trees have brown bark. However, maybe I'm not sure about other things like, I don't know, is it fall? Does this tree have changing colored leaves? Or is it spring and they're still green? I don't know what color the leaves are, but I'll make a guess. And I make a lot of guesses about my memory because I have to just kind of make decisions here and there of what I think was the most accurate without knowing with certainty. For instance, when I have interactions with people in psychosis, I usually don't understand like their motives or their tone. I don't know even their name most of the time. Like when I went to the hospital, I was being horribly bullied by the other patients, but I had no idea. And I couldn't tell for years after that episode because my memories told me that these people were helping me because they would say they were helping me when in fact they were manipulating me. And it had to be kind of confirmed by other people in my life who were aware of the situation that my memory served me wrong and I didn't really know what was happening. So I do technically remember most of what happened in my episodes, but I don't remember what really happened during my episodes. And I am still making decisions in my mind years later about, was that real? Is that what really happened? Was this the situation or was it this? And I'm basically trying to take away that stained glass window to see the tree for what it is.